Finally, we arrived in Moshi town. Moshi is a municipality in northern Tanzania. It is the capital of the Kilimanjaro province. In Tanzania, they call it Mkoa. It is just on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, or rather, on the footsteps of Mount Kilimanjaro. My expectation of Moshi was different from the reality. Was quite different from the reality. I expected Moshi to be very cold. I expected something like Nyeri, but interestingly, Moshi is actually very hot. It's interesting because being on the slopes or on the foothills of the highest mountain in Africa, you'd expect it to be cold. But I came to realize that unlike Mount Kenya, Mount Kilimanjaro is very high, but the areas surrounding it aren't that high, so they are hot. With Mount Kenya, the areas surrounding it are highlands, over 2500 meters above sea level, and they're very cold, all the way from the mountain itself to south of Nairobi. Very cold. One thing I liked about Moshi is there are so many trees. I entered Moshi from the eastern side, though I think the eastern side has more trees than the western side, but the environment was very nice. Trees all over. It took me quite some time even to realize that I was actually in Moshi. I thought I was still in the rural area because the trees had covered all the buildings and all the structures. It doesn't feel like you are in the city. And again, one thing I've realized about Tanzanian towns is, unlike Kenya, Tanzanian towns aren't that populated. Not in terms of the total population, but in terms of the density. They're not dense. You don't see so many people. In Kenya, by the time you are getting into a city like this, you will see so many people. In Tanzania, the people are more spread apart. That is why their cities cover a larger area in comparison to Kenyan cities of similar population. The population of Moshi as of 2017 was 201,000 people, and by 2022 it was estimated to be 220,000 people, and that is about half the size of Eldoret. But like I said before, cities in Tanzania are more sparsely populated than in Kenya. I think one of the reasons is because Tanzanians, unlike Kenyans who live in apartments, Tanzanians mostly live in bungalows, in houses and ground houses. They don't like storied houses. I actually didn't see a storied residential house in Moshi. The only storied buildings I saw were in the commercial areas. And I also don't understand why the bus bay signal in Tanzania has the letter R. Can some Tanzanians explain to me what R means? Maybe it's a Swahili word that I don't know. Because in Kenya, the bus bay sign is just a bus, and that is it. In Tanzania, I noticed that it is a bus and there's an R, sometimes a P. I don't know what that means. So Moshi town, is Moshi a town or a city? I think it's still a town. Though it covers a larger area in comparison to its population because it's very sparsely populated. So Moshi town is about half the size of Eldoret in population. Eldoret is the 5th largest city in Kenya and the smallest city in Kenya. Actually, we have only 5 cities, so Eldoret is the smallest of them, and Moshi is about half the size of Eldoret. Moshi sits in one of the most developed areas in Tanzania, regions in Tanzania. Kilimanjaro enjoys one of the highest living standards in Tanzania, and Moshi is the capital city of Kilimanjaro. I was impressed by Moshi's cleanliness, despite the fact that some of the main roads, like the one we are using right now from the eastern side, they don't have sidewalks, so they are quite dusty. But when you get inside the town, it's very clean, and it's well maintained. And because of the low population, you don't see a lot of dirt anywhere. And I was also told by the locals, the current mayor is a very no-nonsense person, so that is contributing to that factor. For a city of just 200,000 people, Moshi covers quite a large area. Tanzanians, I think they don't value land as much as we Kenyans. For us, when you get a plot within a town, a municipality or a city, you can't build a single-story house unless you are building your own residential house. But for rent, you can't build a single-storied house in such land because land is very expensive. Whenever someone buys land within a municipality of a major town or city, they have to do a storied house. In Tanzania, it's different. I think that is why their cities are sparsely populated. It has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is it is easier to keep the town clean, but the disadvantage is construction of infrastructure is very expensive because you have to have larger networks of roads and sewerage system and everything else. And it might also not be very convenient because you have a very spread out city, which means social amenities are far apart. The eastern side, when entering Moshi from the eastern side, you border its upscale neighborhood. They have an upscale neighborhood which I will mention in the next video. I think that is why there are so many trees. Normally, rich people love living in areas with a lot of trees. Not that poor people don't like that, but poor people normally don't have as much choice as rich people. Rich people are more influential, so they can influence how their neighborhood looks like more than poor people. You can see that bus bay with an R. I don't know what that means. I also realized that Moshi isn't as rainy as I thought. Most of the rivers I crossed were seasonal, which is also funny because being just on the foothills of Kilimanjaro, I would expect a lot of rain. Kilimanjaro, I think, has a smaller windward side than Mount Kenya, because the areas surrounding Mount Kenya are very rainy. The areas surrounding Mount Kilimanjaro are also rainy, but not all of them. I think the eastern side, just after Kenyan border, then on the way to Moshi, it's very green and very productive agriculture wise. But as you approach Moshi, it becomes drier and drier. Though it's not that dry, it's just a little bit dry enough to farm, dry enough to look dusty. But they do a lot of farming here. Moshi is the capital of the Chaga people. The Chaga people are the business people in Tanzania, as I was told. They are very good business people and very hardworking. And I noticed that. The Chaga people are very hardworking people and very business oriented. And I started noticing that all the way from Tarakea towards Moshi. They are very good in farming, and I was also told they own a lot of businesses in Tanzania, and I think they are the richest community in Tanzania. Tanzanians are more courteous on the road than Kenyans. I noticed once you try to make a little driving mistake on the road, you get a lot of people shout at you. They even insult you. In Kenya, sometimes breaking rules, traffic rules, is so normal that sometimes even when you break, nobody cares. Even sometimes you can break a traffic rule in front of a policeman and he won't do anything. In Tanzania, it's quite different. They observe traffic rules more than Kenya. I think that is something we should learn from them. Moshi is a banana city in that the Chaga people grow a lot of bananas. So there are bananas everywhere. I realized that when you get into a hotel, especially a local restaurant here in Moshi, one of the food that they have to offer, one of the food that you won't miss is bananas, cooked bananas or plantains, whichever you call them. And in the farms surrounding Moshi, there are a lot of bananas, especially the wetter regions towards the east. So we are approaching Moshi CBD. I think this roundabout marks the beginning of the CBD. There are lots of tuk-tuks in Moshi. Here they call them Bajaj. In Kenya we call them tuk-tuks. There are a lot of tuk-tuks here, but as like I said before, they are more behaved than the ones in Kenya. They obey traffic rules more. Generally, Tanzanians are not fans of high-rise buildings. I don't know why, because you can see Moshi town. For a town of its size, I expected to see more tall buildings, but most of them are short. You can see the architecture, high-pitched roofs. And one thing I liked about the architecture is they mostly use aluminium windows. In Kenya, we prefer steel windows. In Tanzania, even in schools, they use aluminium windows. Moshi supermarket. I didn't see any single mall in Moshi. I think Tanzanians aren't fans of malls too. In Kenya, a town smaller than Moshi has a mall. For a town the size of Moshi, we could have several malls. As you can see, the CBD is very clean. The mayor is really doing good work at keeping the town clean. This looks like a colonial building. The architecture looks like the colonial buildings even in Kenya from the 1950s.